Mark.
Hello. Start video.
Yes.
Start video. Hello.
Hi.
Hey. Oh, hello.
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 Sorry about
You're
that.
very low. Your audio level's very low.
Oh, it is?
Let me see. Yeah.
Wow.
Hello. Good day.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. Is that better?
Yes, that's very good.
Great.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. What a dunce. I usually disable the password, but I guess I was just so flummoxed every time I tried to set up this meeting in advance. I'd go back in and it would be at some other date and time or some weird anomaly or something. Anyway, thanks for your putting up with it.
No, not at all. And thank you for persisting because we first started communicating some time ago, didn't we? But
long time, yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's not typical. I mean, I'm sure the time difference maybe played a small component in it, but not much. It was more just a series of move. Like I had to move. Frankly, I had some personal issues. My father died recently. It was just been, a lot. So, yeah, but
sorry to hear that.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm hoping the recording from here should be probably pretty good. Don't be too far though from the mic. Just in case.
I can go closer.
Yeah. I want you to be comfortable too, though.
Yeah. And it's podcast, so it's audio only. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. I am recording it right off here, but I will only use the audio. Yeah. So nobody.
Otherwise, I would go and put a shirt on, but since it's the pictures have been used, it's really hot in here. I live in a room with really big windows. I'll show you. So. Like really big Scottish windows, and so in the afternoons it gets really hot in this room.
Oh yeah, well it's one of those smartly. It was probably unintentional that it was designed like with smart technology, meaning ecologically that it was designed your apartment there to optimize the natural light and heat, right?
Yes, exactly.
But it might be overkill. You need an air conditioner. But where are you? Are you right now in Scotland?
In Scotland, in Edinburgh, the capital city, and I'm in the south side of town, which is the studenty bit of town. So a lot of the students, because of the crisis, have left. So it's really quiet. It's even more quiet than usual here, and a lot of the apartment blocks are empty around here. So it's quite very almost spooky experience, but quite nice. I'm just getting on with lots of things, so that's fine by me.
Right, sure. Well, I can claim I've been to Edinburgh. That's but it was some years back. But I found it to be a charming city.
And where are you?
I'm in New York, but I'm in Queens right now.
Queens.
Yeah. Right. I went to my father's apartment. He was ailing, as I mentioned. There was a lot of drama going on. So I had sort of set up temporary camp here, which at the time wasn't too bad because my son had to move in with me anyway, my teenage son. Uh-huh. So we didn't realize at the time that we'd be here for months. But it turns out to be good because it's very comfortable, and I don't know, it feels a little bit like we're off the beat, a little bit out of the way here, which and there is a vehicle available to me, which has been nice, which would have been the case. So when we do go to do errands and stuff, we can, use that. Nice. But you're right. Other than sirens, which I'm certain during the course of this conversation, you'll hear sirens in the night because my window's open.
Yes.
It's part of the soundtrack of this podcast.
Absolutely.
So, since I saw the story of film.
Yes.
In Odyssey back in, I guess it had to be around 2011 or so. I don't know. Not long after. I can't remember where I saw it. Maybe once it was already on a streaming platform, or if I saw it elsewhere. But I was so enamored with your narration and your voice. I mean, to have gotten to this point now where I'm talking to you, and now your voice is now this thing I've been so fixated on has now gotten all the way over. We've successfully made it onto the show. It's kind of a fun thing, but. I do want to start there because your narration is so central to. I mean, you're all around around the visual, but at the same time, the narration is almost, I think, exactly as equally important in most of your films. The ones you narrate anyway. So, and I'm wondering how you go about let's say, taking, for instance, the story of film, even though there are a number of other projects where you have the same approach, like how you arrive at this. It's like writing a song.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's music and lyrics, and I kind of feel like you're operating under the same. Well, what comes first?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's the central question when you're writing to picture, what comes first. And I always write to the picture. The picture comes first. There's never a script in advance, Adam. And so where the screen that I'm looking at you on now is the screen where I look at something and I type here and I type what I'm seeing and I would type a kind of response to that. I always write in the present tense, so I say this and here rather than there, or I say is rather than was. And so I'm always looking for a feeling that you and I are watching at the same time in the same moment, and it's not something that I have seen ages ago and you're catching up on. I'm looking for the present tense, the intimacy, a slightly kind of nighttime feel, like nighttime radio where they play slow jazz and things. I've always been interested in that kind of mood when I write. So they are the key elements for me. Present tense, image comes first, and a kind of quietude, I would say.
There is a kind of almost, it's almost like music, though, your films too. As I described it, I was realizing it really does remind me of that same kind of experience. I could put on your narration and see almost everything in my head as I...
Yeah. That's nice. That's nice. You're certainly looking for rhymes and rhythms when I'm writing. You're hoping that the sentence has a rhythm. You're hoping that what I don't want to do is like just convey factual information. And like a lecture or something like that. It needs to be more intimate than that and a bit more poetic than that if possible. And if possible, more musical. That's a compliment to me that you say that. And hopefully that's what I'm aiming for at least.
And then I guess I have to wonder when you begin a project, because like writing a song, which is the only way I can compare. So I'm sorry, I keep dredging up this same comparison because I've written songs, and so I not like to the degree I'm not prolific, but I write from a very it's very artistic. It's the most personal, intimate, artistic way or experience I've ever had was writing music, and so I take from that, and I've never been able to think, today I'm going to write a song about this subject or that subject, but I wonder if you know ahead of time the subject matter, or if you just begin, because you're dealing with archive, and I'm riffing here a little bit. I'm not as prepared with my questions, but how do projects begin, I guess, is the question.
Mm-hmm. So, the great Irish poet Seamus Heaney said that inspiration is a ball kicked in from nowhere. And so, the easy answer is you don't know. It's just something, you have an idea and you don't know where it comes. But when you have an idea once it's arrived, because you feel a bit sick, a bit feverish almost, a bit hot. And so when an idea comes in your head, it sort of infects your brain a little bit and you can't get rid of it. And it's almost like you want to take a headache tablet. The great American director John Sayles talks about the sickness of having an idea. So that's the starting point. That's where you have been invaded or infected by an idea. And what's key to that for me is that it comes from outside. And this is where I sort of say something that a lot of people don't agree with. And most people assume that to be creative is to express yourself. That's, our art schools and almost everybody in the creative world say, I'm expressing myself. I have something to say and I want to show it to the world. And I think exactly the opposite of that. I think by the very fact that I talk about invasion, that something coming into me, a ball kicked in from nowhere, means that I'm not expressing myself when I make films. It's not that I have this incredibly rich, brilliant inner world that I want to share with the audience and show how profound my inner life is. I have no inner life, as it were. I am kind of empty. And I feel, and I think I'm not the only one who thinks this. If you look at, for example, the letters of Vincent van Gogh, he says, the painting does not come from inside me. He says it's already out there in the olive trees, in the baking heat. All he has to do is liberate it from the landscape. This really rings true to me. So that's a long answer to your question, but it's basically to say that the idea comes from outside and I become a kind of a stenographer, or I write down the idea, but I do not generate it. The world generates it. The world is incredibly rich and brilliant and scary and terrible, as we know at the moment in the current crisis. None of us, I certainly could not have invented this new atmosphere, this new thematics, this new Greek tragedy in which we are existing. It came to me.
But in your case, because most of your films, well, at least the ones I've been exposed to, rely on other films, existing films. There's a lot of, I have to imagine copyright is a major component, right? Or not? No. Because the amount of time you use, or because of the way you repurpose it, you're allowed to do this without.
Yeah, I've made films about lots of things. I made films about Holocaust denial and the first Gulf War and lots of things. Of the films that are related to cinema, copyright is never an issue, to be honest, because of the fair use, fair dealing legal precedent, which means that you can use an extract of a work of art. I'm sure you understand how it works for if you're going to refer to it and comment on it in a specific way. And by my nature, that's what I do. So for me, if you want to make a film, you want to make films about the outside world, and whether that outside world is a war or a tree or another film, it doesn't matter. They are all things that are out there. And so when I use, for me, when I'm using a clip of a great film by, I don't know, Orson Welles or Agnes Varda or whoever, it's a bit like filming a tree. It's something out there that's beautiful and inspiring, and I want to understand it. So I try to incorporate it into my own work.
Mm-hmm. So fair use means that as long as it all depends on the context of how you're using it then?
The fair use regulations are online. They say that you must not distort a piece of art that you use. You can only use a bit of it. You need to have something to say about it. You can't use it as a piece of wallpaper. You can't say, okay, here's my new music video, therefore I'm going to use clips from Alfred Hitchcock's film Vertigo, for example. You need to be using it for a purpose. And you need to need it in the way you're using a film clip. You need it to make a point.
It's a reference.
Not just a reference, you need to be commenting on it. Your story needs to rely on it.
I got you. I understand. Yeah. Okay, that's good. I figured that had to be the case, because I'm thinking there's no way you could do some of the projects you've done if you're so limited.
Limited.
What's that?
Limited in what way?
Yeah. Oh, just by getting the whatever rights you need. But I knew about fair use. I thought this has got to be a case where this is, where you are using that, because it just seemed to me like what an enormous undertaking if you had to get permission to use as much of the footage as you clearly are using.
Yeah. And fair use, one of the things about fair use is that you can't use it to save money. It's not about saving money. Right. It's about intellectual liberty and creative liberty. As a filmmaker, can you hear there's an ambulance outside my window? I don't know if you can hear it. But
I hope it comes by here later. That'd be pretty neat.
You're going to get one in Queens and I'm going to get one here in Scotland. So fair use. If if somebody wants to use a film clip and they use fair use just to save money,
Yeah.
then you're not allowed to do that. So it has to be to take an extract from a film and turn it into something else in your artwork, as it were.
Then there's the question of your knowledge. I was watching, for instance, A Story of Children in film.
Yes.
And there's the portion of that film where it's about the various balloons. You know,
Yeah.
I grew up with the red balloon. I was familiar with that. Then I remember seeing the white balloon. I mean, I know because I've spent so much of my life watching cinema. And then I remember there was also, what was the name of the filmmaker who did another balloon?
There's Yellow Balloon, the British one, and then there's I can't remember what. It's so long since I've watched that film, even though I made it, but I can't remember what the other balloon ones are.
Yeah, but I don't want to also just say, oh, there's a balloon in a film. That's how simplistic your approach is. There's other themes going on, which is really the point of tying the films together. But just know that's just one small example of how you're able to, in your fever dream of a film, of how you're able to bring in so many different films to draw a point, to make a point. And it's staggering how you're able to do that. And the only thing I can think of, obviously you have to have a great amount of experience to bring to it, but also, well, maybe again, to compare it to the music and composition, maybe once you are creating an artistic momentum, it's just you're drawing from so much that certain muscles and that you've developed. And
I have a very good visual memory. I've got a terrible verbal memory, but I've got a really good visual memory. So when I'm sitting here at my desk writing about something, I can sort of remember stuff that I've seen years and years and years ago. And that's the first reason why I think I've got a pretty good knowledge of cinema in my head. But the second one I think is even more important, which is that I never rewatch films. I know lots of people who find their comfort zone. They find their 100 favorite films and they rewatch them all the time. Yeah. And I understand that. It's a great pleasure to do that, And I would love to watch Ninotchka again, and I would love to watch Magnificent Ambersons again. But there's such a world of cinema out there, Adam, and so I would rather move on and see something new.
Yeah.
And so when people are watching The Godfather for the 10th time, I'm watching some brilliant masterpiece from India in 1958.
I noticed. But that can't be you. But you got. I mean, obviously, you're going back and you're finding your moments. I hate the word clips because it's like a painting too. And you are going back and rewatching, but
yes,
you're doing that
for the purposes of
within the context of you're making your film. Yeah, I understand.
Yes, only when I if I have to, like when I made my Orson Welles film, I had to rewatch the films in order to write about them.
Sure.
But it was only to have the image in front of me and write about the battle scene in Chimes at Midnight or whatever. I did. This sounds sort of arrogant almost, but I did not need to rewatch the films in order to work out what I think about them, because on the first hit, the first tasting of them, I sort of got what they were. It's a weird thing to say because in many other aspects of life, I am pretty stupid, but when it comes to watching films, I sort of seem to be able to absorb a film like a sponge.
Mm-hmm. And you just how do you typically, I guess historically, not talking about this particular time, but do you typically, I suppose must be like myself, who I see a certain amount of the theaters and I watch a certain amount at home. Is that what you're doing?
Yes. Oh, for me, always a theater the first time. I'll try not to see
Really?
a film the first time on a small screen if possible,
Uh,
because, just for those things that cinema is bigger than life. I always sit in the front row, so the film fills my field of vision. I can see nothing else but the film. And if you're really in the front row, sometimes you need to turn your head. So I want to feel overwhelmed by the film. I want to feel like a child in front of the film. I want to feel that joy that I felt as a boy when I first saw cinema. So I will only reluctantly watch a film for the first time on the small screen. So, for example, when Netflix does a kind of funds Scorsese's Irishman or whatever, I will pretty much insist on seeing it on the big screen first. And probably that'll be the only time I saw Irishman. It'll be in the big screen, front row, huge.
What were you where? Were you in the front row? I saw that. I was fortunate enough to see that particular film, since you brought it up, also at the New York Film Festival, at a press and industry screening, and then afterwards, it's very surreal because they all came out and did it in a. It was very, very interesting. And Joe Pesci was wearing, shades. He was wearing sunglasses, and barely said a word. It was very strange. And I was the most moved by Pesci. I watched there and watching some of the moments, which I would never have gotten if I was watching it on Netflix at home. But watching it like on the big screen, as I was at Alice Tully Hall, I was at moments I was almost brought to tears by just watching his performance in that movie.
And I can understand why he didn't say anything, because, cinema is a sacred place. Cinema is like a church, and so I don't love Q&As
Either.
and after events. I think that you watch the film, you have this experience, you go out into the world, and then maybe 30 minutes later, I used to be director here of the Edinburgh Film Festival, which is one of the oldest film festivals in the world. And when I took over, basically we cancelled Q&As and we said, okay, here's a separate room that we can, if people want to talk about the film, we go there, but not in the sacred space. You watch the film, you leave, people want to have a beer, or in those days people smoked, have a cigarette, and then there was another room, and you go there and you meet the filmmakers. And we had Steve Martin and the Coen brothers and Bertolucci and many people sitting on beanbags in a smaller separate room, and it was the right thing to do. It wasn't immediately after the movie.
It's amazing, for as many Q&As as I've moderated over, believe it or not, I can actually do that. I know I feel like I'm practically inarticulate with you for some reason, but I think I'm just overwhelmed by your work, But I've always felt like, even though I'm a part of the problem in the sense that I when people ask me to moderate at their Q&As, I always say yes, especially when they pay, because it's a nice thing to be able to, when a distributor pays me to come in and do that. But I'm also saying out of the side of my mouth, man, this is not an organic thing. This is when I watch the film, I leave during Q&As often if I'm in the audience, because I don't feel I need to let it wash over me, and my thoughts. I haven't had time to form a question. I mean, if I have one.
And I think that cinemas aren't. There's another ambulance. You hear that one? It's really loud.
Yeah. I thought I was going to get them. You're actually you're downtown, I guess.
Cinemas aren't talking places in a way. They're looking places. They are videodromes. And I love talking about cinema, and I love talking to you about cinema, but not in a cinema. For me, it doesn't work very well. And where possible, I don't do them. Do Q&As in cinemas. I say, could we go somewhere else? So I toured recently with one of my films, and I said to the audience, look, it's a very long film, and I said to the audience, look, when you finish this very, very long film, I'll be in this cafe or in this bar, and whoever wants to show up, and then I'll buy you a beer or coffee, and then we'll talk for as long as you want. We can talk for 6 hours if you want, but not in the sacred space.
That's amazing. I never, as many people as I've talked to about this feeling, no one's brought it. I'm always the one bringing it up. I'm like, if there was some way to, I didn't think about it as in terms of the sacred space quite like you do, but it makes sense. But I was thinking maybe people need like a half hour or something to breathe in and let this marinate. And
Yeah, and maybe it's time, but maybe it's something else. It's also like there's the kind of poetic and the prosaic. There's poetry and prose, and you need to step from one territory into the other one, I think.
hmm. um, Tell me about, you grew up primarily in Scotland, right? Even though
No,
maybe
in Northern Ireland.
Northern England, you were
Northern Ireland.
Northern Ireland.
Yes.
But you were born in England, is that right? Or
Yeah, I was, I was born in England, but we only lived there for 2 months, and so everything of my upbringing was Northern Ireland. During the Troubles and all that.
hey, what was that like?
Oh, that was a lot of fun. Yeah, it was.
Can you tell me about that in 5 minutes or less?
Yeah.
But where were you introduced to going to movies? Was it then?
Well, because during the Troubles, during the low temperature war we had in Northern Ireland, the cinemas were open, but not massively so. And at the worst of it, people were scared of going out. So life was privatized in some way. And so I did go to the cinema. I often went on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember seeing films like Steve Martin's Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid on my own, the only person in the cinema. But most of my love of cinema came from TV, because it was safer to watch TV at home. And we have a very good broadcaster here in the UK, the BBC, and they would do seasons of Orson Welles films and Alfred Hitchcock films. And I remember seeing loads of, it was mostly American cinema. I remember seeing, John Garfield movies and Robert Siodmak movies, and so the classic American cinema, the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
They were my incubator in a way at home, and it felt safe to be at home. But also, these films were not safe. When you think of Orson Welles' Touch of Evil, do you think of that John Garfield film Force of Evil, for example? These are films about nightmare experiences and dark, gothic, racist, exploitation. And for a boy to enter that world through the safe space of my own home, it was like space travel and time travel.
You're near Belfast, I guess?
Yeah.
Is that where you were?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I got that from, of course, your 2015 film, I Am Belfast. So interesting, you're attracted to films that kept you out of a comfort zone.
Yes, very much so. I think that's one of the things about cinema, and young people as well. When you're 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, you want to be excited.
Yeah.
I didn't want, to be patronized or, to given safe films. I remember I saw the film The Exorcist, for example, far too young. And that was not good. But nonetheless, it excited me. I wanted to know what was out there. Teenagers, I think, their imagination runs riot, and they want it. It's a very hungry imagination, the teenage imagination, and that was the case with me. So sitting in Belfast, I wanted to see stories of the devil, like The Exorcist. I wanted to see stories of something called high school, which I'd never heard of, where people fall in love and swap clothes, which was Grease, and the tough boy becomes tender and the tender girl becomes tough. That's what I wanted to see. I wanted to see films with textures that I hardly understood. I remember seeing Calamity Jane starring Doris Day, and there was something about it. It was like silk. And only later did I get it better. But these films that seemed to be, conventional stories, they were about much more than that, and that fed my imagination.
I was thinking maybe because you grew up, if you're growing around the Troubles, and there's always this suggestion of violence around the corner, or the potential for violence around the corner, that maybe anesthetizing yourself was too dangerous in a way. It's like if you're allowing yourself to kind of fall into some sort of slumber, then it's too much of a shift to come back, and maybe it's just easier to kind of keep yourself stimulated.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. When you're feeling a bit scared, you're in fight or flight mode. Your
Yeah.
adrenaline has pumped,
Yeah.
and something placid or everyday is frankly boring in that circumstance. You want a hit of something, and I was lucky enough I was asked to go to Sarajevo during its terrible siege, where 10,000 people were killed, and they asked me and a number of people to go to set up a cinema there, and we set up an underground cinema during the war. And Susan Sontag went, and lots of other people went. And what we noticed is that when we set this underground cinema, and 10,000 people were killed in a relatively short amount of time, people didn't want sort of bland escapism. They wanted something much more astringent than that, And when you're alert and scared, a lot of stuff can seem bland. And I learned a lot from that. I thought even during a war, and Sarajevo was a real war, much more so than what we had in Belfast. Even during a war, people wanted art, and they wanted stories,
Sure.
And they wanted cinema.
Mm-hmm.
And that I learned an awful lot from that, So that for me, what I learned is that cinema isn't only something you do on a Friday night when you've had a hard week's work, and you just want to kick back and escape. Even though it is that, and that's one of the great things about it. But also, you want to feel alive, and cinema can really make you feel alive. And that aliveness of cinema is something that has never left me.
When you were young and you went to the cinema, did it feed your? Obviously it fed your imagination, but were you also like when I would come out of the movie theaters, I would be in such enriched. My internal fantasy life was only stimulated and heightened when I would come out, and I would really go through this process of having to, just. Live there in my head for a while after coming out of the movie theaters.
Yeah, I think going to a movie theater is you can shed all your inhibitions. You can be anybody and everybody. There are no boundaries. You can be, if you come from a poor background, as I did, you can feel as if you're really rich. You can you can traverse class boundaries, sexual boundaries, every kind of boundaries. You can, be sitting in Queens where you are now and see a film about Paris or Stockholm or Mumbai or Cairo, and you can be there. And I think those of us who love movies like you and I do, we have this in common. No matter if we're watching a film from the other side of the world, it's not foreign to us because it speaks our language, which is the language of cinema. Mm-hmm. And I think, a slightly political aspect of this is that at a time when we've got political leaders in your country and mine and others who are trying to convince us that we're very different from our neighbors in other countries, and cinema is the opposite of that. It's really good. It's a universal language in some way, and it's really good at saying, despite the fact that I'm in Ireland or Scotland and you're in Queens or wherever, we can see films from the other side of the world and understand the other side of the world and realize that those people on the other side of the world are our brothers and sisters. And that's quite moving for me, in a time of nationalism when, our political leaders are telling us another story.
Mm. What did your parents, what did they do?
So my dad was a motor mechanic. He fixed cars. And my mom was a home help. And, so working with old people in their home,
yes.
Cooking food, making the fires, etc.
Mm. And when did you realize that cinema was going to be your work, your life?
You know, I was brought up Catholic. In the Catholic Church, there's this idea of the vocation. Are you going to be a priest? Are you going to be called to the priesthood? And it felt like it was my vocation. You know, I felt as if I hadn't a choice in it. You know, I was talking earlier about Seamus Heaney saying that a ball kicked in from nowhere. I feel that cinema chose me. I didn't choose it. And so it was watching those films on TV in my teenage years and childhood, and I felt that cinema reached out of the screen and grabbed me and said, you know, I want you. And that sounds too violent. Let me put that another way. It put its arm around my shoulder and said, "Let me take you around the world." That's a better way of putting it. So it was a compulsion. It was an addiction. It was an intoxication.
And the church lost a potential priest in the
Absolutely.
But of course, there, you know, it's as the risk of bringing up an old cliche. Of course, you ended up in a church of a sort anyway, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely.
One could argue, right?
Of course, yeah.
Certainly, having that religious experience.
Yeah.
And the way you talk about it, it certainly sounds the same.
It is the same. And when, you know, I'm here in Scotland and the great actor Tilda Swinton lives here and we do things together, you know, and we make things. And one of the things we did was called A Pilgrimage. It was based on the Catholic idea of a pilgrimage, you know. And so we took a cinema and we pulled it on wheels from the west coast of Scotland to the east coast of Scotland. Literal like a 37-ton truck that was a cinema, and it was a tow rope on our shoulders, and it was hard work. And the idea was to show we love cinema this much, we're prepared to pull it between villages and towns. So that's an explicit example where cinema was our religion. And
Tilda Swinton was pulling with you.
Yes, and the audience, you know, I mean, Tilda and we had an audience of about, it's a small mobile cinema, so it was about, at any time, about 50 people, and we pulled.
And where did you go?
From the west coast of Scotland to the east coast of Scotland.
Oh, okay. Now that's how many, I guess I would ask kilometers, right? I have to.
Yeah, so quite a long time. I mean, we did not pull uphill because the truck was so heavy, so we only pulled on the flat. So we didn't do every mile or every kilometer, but we did, you know, every day. We did it over 8.5 days, and every day we pulled for a good bit of the time.
Try doing that here in the States, just from one coast to the other.
I mean, it's interesting because I was talking to Michael Moore about I'm on the board of the Traverse City Film Festival, and so we were.
I was there last summer. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So we were talking about maybe trying to use a mobile cinema in some way to get out into the communities in Michigan and further afield. You know?
Mm-hmm. Well, he's done a good job of that.
Yeah.
Like at least in Traverse City, and
yeah.
It's interesting. He, you know, since we're talking about the power of cinema, he feels that since he's renovated and renovated a number of theaters, and since he's created the festival, that the state has gone Democrat.
Well, what is certainly true is within Traverse City, once the state cinema was built, there were, as you know, there were a lot of derelict buildings around there, and there was a kind of domino effect. You know, there was an outward ripple, and on Main Street in Traverse City, more buildings were refurbed and more cafes and restaurants opened, and the community benefited, you know, and this is the cluster theory. And this is the kind of, you know, theory of optimism. If you do something like shining and luminous in the center of somewhere, you know, it'll kind of raise the tide and of business confidence and cultural confidence. And so that's really what happened in Traverse City.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're ripe for this right now. It's going to, I keep looking at this. I know you're not here in the States, but in there's so many towns and small cities like Traverse City where for so many decades the downtown has been, you know, in free fall economically. And
absolutely.
And I feel like we're at presents an opportunity if, of course, governments will see it as such. But for downtowns to come back, and they've all have most of them have a cinema.
Yeah. And I think, I'm not an American, so I don't know the answer to this, but my hunch is that the central idea of a downtown is where people meet together,
Yes.
have joint experience, social and collective experiences. And one of the dangers about America is its founding myth of individualism and the frontier, and my space is different from your space, and I think that,
or it's my space.
Yeah. And what's worrying about America is that if it hangs on to the founding myth of individualism, then its Detroit's and its main streets and its downtowns will continue to die. And instead of enjoying, as New Yorkers know and many parts of America know, the pleasure of the collective experience, the joint experience, we're all in this together through thick and thin, and we're in thin at the moment because of the lockdown. I think that's why America has to shift its mythology in some way and rediscover the ideas. Yeah, there's another one going right past.
I hear it. Oh, I hear it.
And rediscover the values of the New Deal, and that sense of we are on our pleasures, our satisfactions, our joys as human beings are forged in some kind of collective way rather than through individualism.
Well, the cinema gives you both at the same time, because you're in a cinema, especially if you're going alone. You're experiencing it very much in an isolated way. Yet you're with your neighbors.
Yes. But I guess I'm talking about cinema buildings as well. If there's let's imagine a small city in Iowa or something, and it's got a cinema that closed in the 1980s. If the community can open that up, and even if it gets a bit of state support or not, the sense of well-being and community will benefit everyone. And it will rely on maybe seniors, retired people, etc., and all sorts of volunteering mechanisms. But that the uplift is remarkable. So I think that the impact of a cinema building reopening, especially reopening after this lockdown and this crisis, will, is got huge potential, a kind of rebirth.
What do you do when you're in lockdown? What are you doing?
So my partner, she works for the National Health Service here, and so she's really plugged in to the current crisis. So my primary job is to make sure there's a nice meal on the table when she finishes her working day. And I quite like cooking, and so around 5 o'clock or 5:30 every day, I'll turn on the radio and listen to the latest terrible news and start chopping onions to make whatever it is for that evening. I watch a lot of TV. Not at all cinema and TV, but other types of TV. Mm-hmm. I love dancing. I have a camper van, an old 70s camper van sitting outside my apartment here, and we drove once from here to India.
Wait a minute. Scotland I thought Scotland, well, no, you're connected to England.
Yeah, so that's a long way.
I don't know.
That's a very, very long way. It's driving through all the European countries, all the Arabic countries into India. So a long way. So, I like the epic.
I guess I can drive from here to Chile if I wanted to.
Yes. Yeah, I love walking, and I've walked across, the world's great cities. I've walked across Los Angeles, of course, New York many times, Mumbai, Tehran, Moscow, Paris, London, obviously, Mexico City. I've walked across I love setting out at 7 a.m, thinking 12 hours later I might have a beer somewhere at the other side of the city.
Blisters. I'm just thinking about this.
Blisters.
Or the heat. I love long walks too, and I've done not quite what you're talking about, but sometimes I'll just do these 5-hour.
Yes.
I know if I have a specific terrain, and because New York is so big and so sprawling that I always know I'm just going to see streets and buildings and people that you just never get to see. I need that time I love
Absolutely.
those. I love it, especially it would be right around this time of year where I would be doing this because the weather really is just perfect for that.
Absolutely. I've long intended to walk from Manhattan to JFK, and I've not done it yet. And Will Self did it, but that's on my to-do list.
It has to be alone.
Yes.
Well, I would definitely say you'd be walking pretty close to here if you did that, but I don't know if I'll be here at that point. I have to leave soon, and then I'm actually sending my son who's sleeping in the next room to his mother who's in Los Angeles, and he's turning 16 in a few days, and he's going to be then. She's coming in and getting him and taking him back to Los Angeles, and I may follow after them in a month or two, like once I've settled all my father's legal issues and and clearing out his place.
What were you like when you were 16?
Well, I know I went to the movies a lot. I was also very 16. I was very into my jazz guitar. I was taking jazz guitar from this guy named Joe Monk. My dad would drive me out every other weekend to my guitar lesson nearby in Long Island, and that was very important to me. I don't think I still. It was in high school, right? It would have been in high school. You turned the tables on me. I was not prepared. I was starting to get a sense of myself, I think, by then. I also made a decision after being socially awkward, not believing. When I went to high school, I just decided I'm going to reinvent myself a little bit and just sort of allow myself to be fully realize myself. And I knew that I had all these things I could say and do, and that I had a personality that I wanted people to really see, And I gave myself that opportunity. Unfortunately, I went to a high school that really was open to that. So that was very important. Period.
Why did you keep your personality hidden before that?
It's that kind of Pink Floyd, brick in the wall type of thing, where I went to this big middle school and where I just hated it. I mean, I just was very unhappy, and I think I just, kind of disappeared within myself in that way, and I was not happy. But when I went to high school, I was sort of realizing that I had so much I wanted to do, and I was fortunately, we had a very great theater program there, so it was really like, it was a lot of what people like me who were probably outcasts who came together, and we had these amazing teachers, and so it was a really positive time actually. My high school.
Has your personality remained the same since then?
Yeah, I think it has. Yeah, through social media, I reconnected with some of my old high school friends over time, here and there, and yeah, it feels that like I feel, through them, you sort of remember, they have a sense of who I was 30, 40 years ago, and so I still, that's basically who I am. I think so.
Do you like being asked questions about yourself?
Yeah, I don't mind it. I just, it was thrown a little bit because I haven't really thought about that more. It's a little uncomfortable, but not terribly. I'm open. Maybe it's you in particular asking me. I don't know, because I have there's still like a part of me is shy.
Yeah.
I've learned how to perform the version of myself that's not shy, who's not shy in a way. So I think that's part of probably what I'm describing. This constant tension between the shy part of myself and the more outgoing, extroverted part of myself. The desire to be not shy. But when I'm unhappy or, like I was in my middle school years, or when I'm with someone who is shy, let's say, I become that person again, that shy person that's there inside me. And
you think shyness is a good thing to have?
Sure.
I think, especially for people who are trying to, be creative.
Yeah, I suppose so.
The
Yeah,
shy people
because
are the ones
yeah,
who, in high school, were on the side of the playground, weren't they? They weren't in the middle; they were on the edge.
right, for sure. That the margins, as it were.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and
for sure. And I think if you're super extroverted, I feel like it's maybe tougher. It's harder to find that internal time that you need in order to be an artist, or creative. Anyway, I don't know. There's definitely always been that inner tension within me of wanting to be like doing a podcast, for instance. It's arguably creative. However, it's not really artistic, you know. And when I was in lockdown, well, first of all, right before I was in lockdown, I actually wrote my first film. I'm 56, and I wrote my first short film, you know, and I was really close to, I had cast it with the real actors, and I was going to even be in it. I was going to direct it, and you know, which is now kind of on temporary hold. But I was really starting to allow myself to return to a more creative place, a more artistic place, because I feel like I've been on the, I don't know, not on the, well, I've been certainly talking to a lot of people, and it's not that I felt jealous of them. It's just more like inspired and missing this part of my self that I kind of always not allowed to flower fully or blossom. You know, going back to the jazz guitar days, where you know my teacher at one point said to me, you know, this was years after playing and you know taking lessons. He said one day to me, he said, you know, if you want to be a jazz guitar player, you can do it. You have it. You have the talent. And I didn't want to be a jazz guitarist, but him saying that to me was profound for me. You know, it was definitely.
how often are you totally happy?
Oof, I don't know. Not. I don't remember the last time I felt that way.
Really? So are we talking months or?
No, I don't remember well, there are moments, but I don't feel like. Are you talking about like in general, or are you talking about
Yeah,
just
general,
moments?
just a pure sense of being alive.
Yeah, I don't remember. I don't remember. There's been some level of conflict, I think, for a while. You know, losing my father was very painful, but I also feel like, in another sense, it's been a liberating thing. My mother is in a nursing home. Has very advanced dementia, very advanced. And she had gotten the coronavirus. It got into that facility, and you know, I was almost thinking, man, I hope this is it for her. I hope this late brings her to, you know, her death, because you know, it should be fast and painless. And but living through my parents' old age has been really difficult, you know, and it's been going on for a while. So yeah,
It's when we get to, I'm exactly the same age as you, and so when we get to our age, you know, I think we have to face that, don't we? The
yeah.
end of our parents' lives.
I think part of the answer to your question is I'm so preoccupied with my mortality. It sounds like a Woody Allen line, but you know, I'm not scared to death. I just don't want to be there, you know, when it happens.
Yeah,
That is, in a sense, I'm constantly preoccupied with dying.
yeah,
I don't talk about it much, but I think it really is. It's not funny, because I think it really, you know, I'm constantly doing the math in my head, like my midlife crisis. I actually thought this is an actual documentary project, because it's a cliche. It's you know, the midlife crisis, the guy who leaves his marriage, buys his sports car, right? Gets
yeah.
the trophy girlfriend or what have you. But when you're truly preoccupied with how much time you have left, and how all of your decisions were made by some irresponsible idiot version of yourself when you were much younger, and you know, you just went with it rather than realized much more for yourself or whatever. I just feel so. I went through this really long period where it really was, you know, a wreck, you know, because I realized I have to live with a lot of the decisions I've made. You know, that was a troubling period, you know. but I guess what I've been doing slowly is realizing, well, perhaps, but there's also still time to there's so much more to do. You do emerge from that period and you realize, well, I can make this film. I can now I can, I picked up the guitar again, and been playing, and it's been really joyful,
I mentioned earlier chopping onions.
Yes.
That moment of the day where I can give myself permission to stop working and step away from the edit suite or step away from the script that I'm writing and go and put on the radio. And we've got a great radio station here called Six Music that I watch, and chop onions and pour myself a glass of wine. And it's just, a kind of joyful moment for me, because I think I've done the best I can do. A day is an amazing thing, and it's a unit of our lives. We don't know how many we'll have, but that threshold moment where I can move from act 2 of the day into act 3 of the day by chopping onions.
Yeah. I guess I took your question in a more, maybe a more broader interpretation of it, like, a phase of feeling a certain level of pure joy or something like that, but I definitely have many moments, and I just love living with my son. I'm as happy as I've ever been in that regard. Like I'm actually sort of, what's the word? I'm dreading, I suppose, his mother taking him. I mean, I think that will also present some new opportunities, and I have to empty this place out also. So it's important that he go. But just this period has been, when he does come out of that bedroom, it's really been just terrific, and I know exactly what you mean, and I feel, and also I just, in a way, I feel like I'm thriving in this period right now. I don't know what it is. I know a lot of people are suffering and all, of course, but like just that the world has slowed down, and now it's completely the world I'm making here, in a way. I'm creating all my schedule every day, and doing the work that I decide I'm going to do. And that's really tremendously satisfying.
Yeah, I agree. I think that so many people are going through some terrible times, but those of us who are lucky enough to not be going through those times, there's a sort of return to a kind of almost like a pre-industrial age, even though we're talking through technology, but it's quite a lot about cooking and homework and cleaning the house and all those practical stuff, and the satisfaction. We'd forgotten the satisfactions of things. Obviously, when people have got loads of childcare issues and there are loads of people who are living at home with abusive partners and things, and all that's terrible. But if we're lucky enough not to have those stressors in our apartments and our homes, then it's really fertile.
Yeah. So it's and doing this has been much more actually positive experience. That I've always thought, whenever I do the podcast, for instance, and somebody suggests doing it remotely, it's always for me, you don't quite have the opportunity to connect, But I'm finding, maybe because of the same thing, maybe so much of things have slowed down that now I can really can be really present during these, in a way that was harder, more challenging before.
Yeah, and I think the virus has leveled everybody in a way. It's made. We've certainly got a lot in common because everybody's at home, and simple things like that has made given the people a bit more empathy for each other.
I hope so. Yeah, right. Yeah.
I hope you're going to keep this last bit of the conversation in the podcast, will you?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you for letting me enter into your head and into your world.
Pleasure, Adam. It's very nice talking to you after all this time.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, I'm glad it worked out that it happened to be today that this happened, and it's so perfectly quiet. except for the sirens that are going by your
Yes.
street.
Yeah, I've had several. Yeah. Well, let's try and meet in real life when it all ends. I'm in New York quite often, so let's try and meet.
I'd love that. Yes. Well, maybe a long walk would be nice. Too.
Yeah.
I don't know. That sounds like it's something you do in solitude as well, but maybe you'll make an exception.
That'd be nice. That'd be nice.
All right. Terrific. Well, it must be almost time to chop some onions. I don't know. What time is it?
It's only 4:00 here. It's only 4:06.
Oh, very good. Okay.
So I'll do some more work and then chop some onions.
Me too. All right.
Pleasure.
Same here. Oh, hey, I have one other. Actually, I'm sorry to interrupt.
You can ask more questions if you want. I'm not wrapping up. If you can ask more questions, you can.
Well, no, this was actually more of a request.
Yes.
Which is because of my relationship with your narration. As you know, it's really. I have a separate relationship with your narration than I do with your voice than I do with you now. But if you could do a one of those IDs for me where you introduce my show, because
sure.
it would be such a
it
would be a pleasure.
What would you like me to say?
Well, you can of course say anything you want, but it has to incorporate. The only rule, I guess, is that it would have to say you're listening to Filmwax Radio somewhere in there, but.
Okay. Ready? Hi, I'm Mark Cousins. I'm in Scotland talking to Adam, and you're listening to Filmwax Radio. And we talk about cinema and passion, but then we talk about more personal stuff as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I hate to say goodbye, but I need to let you go, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Keep in touch, and we'll meet each other in real life at some point.
Absolutely.
Pleasure.
Okay.
Thanks for your time.
You
Lovely
too.
to talk to you.
Same here.
What's your son called?
Jacob.
Is Jacob into movies?
Yeah.
Not
like
obviously.
No, he's into storytelling, but he's into he's been obviously really into his gaming. I will say that. Yeah.
Cool.
But he is but he's also he does a movie night with his friends every weekend, and and he does most of his movies. And I try to do a movie night with him. I have a projector too here. So
nice.
I try to do like a movie night with him, but he has less time for that these days.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice talking to you.
Same here. Take care.
Bye. How do we turn this off?